This first question is for Tim and Larry and Scott. I just want to know sort of the genesis of the project, because I know that Larry and Scott were going to direct this initially, and you were going to produce it, Tim. I just wanted to know sort of what that process was like.
Well, I stole it from those. No, I mean,
he's our Walter Keane.
We were working on parallel kind of universes, because I didn't know Scott and Larry were writing a script on this, and I had actually met, somebody told me this story. I didn't know, I knew Keane's work because I grew up with it. I didn't know the real story, and a friend of mine told me it, and then I was in San Francisco once and met her and commissioned a painting from her, and then I don't know how long after that.
It was about a couple years after that we approached you about producing the movie.
Yeah.
And we, whatever, we did Ed Wood together, so we had this relationship along the time. And so we came up with this project. We discovered Margaret's story. We're actually doing a movie a script that took place on another planet. And we needed examples of like Earth kitsch that kind of destroyed this higher civilization, and so we were getting like disco balls and that kind of stuff. And we discovered this story, and we discovered like this painful, truthful story behind those paintings, and we were like, that's a movie. And so we developed it for a while, and it fell apart a couple times, and then we approached him about him directing it and us producing the movie.
This question is for the actors, because all of you are new to the sort of Tim Burton universe. What about you do you think makes you a good Tim Burton character? And Tim, what did you see in all these new actors?
Well, I mean, obviously they're great actors. So and I've admired all of them. So it just seemed like it all fit. I mean, it was like he's Walter. She's Margaret. Yeah, I mean, these people are very, and it was just fresh energy for me to work with new people, and because everybody's been getting sick of the people I was working with, so. I know, it's sad, isn't it?
I was also getting sick of the people he was working with.
I'm just going to go down the line. The first question, Danny. You obviously play this like unscrupulous sort of gossip columnist. Did you look to inspiration for any particular people who maybe you have encountered in your life?
Well, I didn't have to really look all that far, truthfully. Hello. Yes, I play this sort of columnist, a character called Dick Nolan, and it was sort of just fun to sort of play that sort of tabloid aspect of the art world, and really also just serving the story and asking the question in regards to what is art.
Did you have any sort of, well, first of all, what did you guys think of these paintings? I mean, when you first saw these paintings, were you fans or what did you think?
Well, Christoph, we have two good. Well, I mean, I grew up with it, so I mean, it was very present. I always felt that it was like suburban art. I mean, it was in people's living rooms, a doctor's office, dentist's office, and it was culturally just very present at the time that I grew up. And I can't say. Well, I like things that I find fascinating. I found them quite disturbing, actually. I mean, it's like Big Brother watching you, these big eyes, and the polarized sort of responses to it. Some people loved it, obviously, and some people just wanted to rip it off the walls. And so that kind of response I found quite fascinating.
Kristen, your character obviously sort of thinks that Walter is a jerk from the get-go. But I mean, did you think that he was had any kind of artistic ambition, or was he purely sort of a vampire?
I think that he was a total vampire.
Flat out. Okay, Christoph. What was it like sort of trying to make this character, likable, even though he is sort of a complete sociopath?
What's not to be liked? I don't get it. Should I answer that seriously? Because if he weren't likable, you wouldn't have a story. Why would Margaret hook up with an unlikable character? Also, the story shows or asks you to participate in one way or another in that development of this relationship. the relationship only makes sense when you can, to some degree, identify with it. If you have an unlikable person, why would you want to identify with a relationship, a story? And what would you think about Margaret?
Well, I think he's not, I think he has like buried sociopath within him, and this just sort of attention and kind of brings it out. But I don't think when we meet him, he's a sociopath. He just develops some, would you call it sociopathic kind of tendencies? I don't know.
Yeah, the pressure of market economy is something that brings out the worst in all of us.
Amy, what was it like playing such a subtle character, especially the last time we saw you was in American Hustle, which was so crazy and sort of wild. Was that part of the appeal?
No, I mean, yes, but I didn't really think of her as a subtle person. I just thought of her as Margaret, and that's Margaret. So it wasn't as though I was like aiming to portray a thing. I was portraying a person, and she's a very understated human being and a very although she gave us some zingers the other night. I don't know if you heard about it. She was like on fuego. She was great. But just her nature is very internal. So I didn't feel as though I was portraying a thing per se, but a person.
And Jason, sort of how did you get into the mindset of being the snooty art critic?
Well, yeah. Yeah, that's, I've been waiting to play this. Fine, you know, I think that, you know, like a gallery owner, or in the art world, there's so many different people that make the machine work, but a gallery owner is someone who represents, you know, what is going to be sold and how much things cost and their value, whatever that means. And so it's a fun character to play, especially, you know, to Walter, who's coming in with something quite wild, and he's, you know, he's kind of like the gatekeeper of his street.
It's funny, actually, Kristen and I last weekend showed the movie at Miami Art Basel, and it was to an audience of nothing but the Jason Schwartzman character. You know, the gallery owners and Terrence Stamps, and we were a little nervous, like how this, you know, how the keen art in the film would go over with these people. But you know, just walking around that arena, it made it instantly clear that the whole line between high art and low art and commerce has just been totally blurred. And you know, it's like Walter Keane could do what he did back then today and just be honest about it. Like, oh, someone else paints my paintings and I put my name on it and watch my TED Talk. You know.
Larry and Scott, supposedly the actual sort of trial was even more outlandish than what was in the movie. I mean, how did you guys decide sort of what to contain and what to sort of let go?
Yeah, I mean, we got all the coverage from the Honolulu papers, and it was a Marx Brothers scene. And it was so extreme that what's always painful is we had to cut jokes out because Walter's behavior was so erratic. I mean, by the end of this downward spiral, he was really delusional. He really believed he was the painter. He really believed he could be his own lawyer. He was running back and forth to the witness box, interrogating himself. The judge was calling on the bailiffs to shackle him and screaming at him that he had cement between his ears, and he was bringing in ex-girlfriends to testify on his behalf, and they were calling him a pig on the stand. And I mean, it was so bananas that we had to pull back just so we could have some sense of reality in the climax of this movie.
Right. Amy, could you talk about the challenge?
Now we can hear you.
Of playing this woman who we meet, leaving a controlling husband, fleeing with her daughter, and it's like a revolving door. She goes into this new situation, and I think people today can sort of understand abused women who are physically abused, but this psychological captivity that she's in for 10 years. You know, it seems like a remarkable thing that you have to do.
I think it's very common, unfortunately. Part of psychological abusive relationships, it's like very isolating and very controlling, and very soon you feel complicit to whatever that abuse is. And in this case, it was a lie in which she chose to be a part of. I believe she, even to this day, gives Walter credit, saying, I wouldn't be known if it weren't for him, and he was a genius at what he did. And I would have never had the following that I have today. The thing that I liked about Margaret and what I felt kept her from playing a victim, because I didn't want her to feel like a victim, was when you talk to her, she does still take credit, and or she still takes responsibility. Like, she feels guilty that Walter ended up the way he did. She's like, maybe if I didn't lie, he would not have turned out like he did with that poor character kind of thing. Like, she really feels badly, and I liked her sense of ownership in this, in the deception.
Had you met her before this?
No, I mean, I was familiar with her art, but I had not met her. I met her a couple weeks before we started filming. I kind of sat down with her for a day. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Hi, this question is for Tim Burton. Were you drawn to this story and this character, Margaret Keane, in any way because of personally, because of the challenges you face in the movie industry being dominated by business interests?
Well, yeah, and I mean, that's why I enjoyed Ed Wood, that Scott and Larry wrote as well, because to me, there's a fine line of what's perceived as good and bad, and you know, I've been through that myself. You know, when they had the MoMA show here, you know, the critics, you know, I was about 100 times worse than Walt Keane. You know, I mean, it got so lambasted, and then at the same time, you know, it had a high attendance rate. You know, so I've experienced that kind of thing of like good and bad, and you know, the fine line, because when you do something, you're very passionate about it, and whether it's like Ed Wood or the Keens, you know, there's just such enthusiasm, and you know, they thought they were making probably, you know, like, you know, Michelangelo, as where, you know, Ed Wood thought he was making Star Wars when he was doing Plan 9 from Outer Space. So, you know, you understand that kind of misguided enthusiasm, and then you understand the sort of polarization of people's responses to things.
One of the things that I enjoy about the film is that it's, you know, it's at the cusp of the 50s to the 60s, and so we also get to see this backdrop. And I was kind of curious to know what you guys, maybe for all of you, to reflect on what you learned or how you had to sort of insinuate yourself into the backdrop of the, you know, beats to the hippies, and also how this art kind of contrasted. The funny thing about the art as it came out was that it was the antithesis of all of that. It was like the anti-psychedelic. But yet somehow part of it was embraced by the psychedelic community and some of it was really reviled. So I'm kind of curious to know what you guys thought about it in that historical context.
I mean, just speaking of the jumping off point, I mean, we thought it was a scream that Margaret and Walter were based in the hippest place in the West Coast. I mean, you had Greenwich Village on the East Coast and you had North Beach on the West Coast. It couldn't get hipper, and they are so square. But they chose to be based there, and so they were in it, but they really weren't of it. I mean, so you know, Walter was working the nightclubs. Margaret was back in her home, and she really had no interest in hanging out with the beatniks. But we definitely brought in Christian Ritter's character to sort of get the audience up to speed with that was where the world was at with what was hip and what was modern.
Yeah, what was funny was when we did our initial research, we went up to San Francisco to try to talk to people from the art world, and the people who were like hipsters in the art world at that time didn't have any recollections of the Keens. They knew who they were, of course, but when the people who did know them were bartenders, old bartenders. Like, oh, Walter was great. He'd come in here, he'd buy drinks for everybody, old nightclub owners. So that's really, that was their world as opposed to, you know, the hipster Kerouac North Beach.
I mean, it was very druggy. I mean, like, you know, big eyes, large pupils. I mean, it's, you know, it somehow weirdly fit into that scene.
And also the MDHs get really trippy, which is the Margaret's personal style, where like you really, you can really read psychological things into them, where there's a woman coming out of a frame or a woman cut in half, and they get really trippy at that point.
But I appreciate a lot that you think that all of us cannot remember the era.
This question is for Scott, Larry, and Tim, and Amy, if you'd like to jump in on this. I was noticing something about the facts and fiction on this. I recall because I remember those era, because I lived in San Francisco during that time, you know, a little bit after that time. But I remember that she was a Jehovah's Witness prior to leaving Tennessee. And was it your idea to not invoke this kind of thought into the film that, you know, because it is a little deceiving if you're a devout Jehovah's Witness that you're taking money from public, signing someone else's name on this con, you know, because basically it was a con in a way.
No, I think you're actually, you got your facts wrong a little bit. She became a Jehovah's Witness during the time period of the film, and we actually embraced that a great deal. When her becoming a Jehovah's Witness was something that we found fascinating, and we wanted to treat it with respect because it actually was a gigantic thing in Margaret's life. So at least from what she's told us, she became a Jehovah's Witness after she went to Hawaii. So yeah, she was
Methodist.
Yeah, but she was always, and what we sprinkled throughout the film is that she was dabbling in a couple other religions here and there, numerology and stuff like that. I think her isolation made her feel like she had to look for a higher answer. And you know, initially when we were thinking about doing the project, we never thought about putting the religion in the film. But when we talked with her and met with her and found out how important it was to her, we just embraced it because we love the fact that, you know, when people are watching this movie and those two women start walking up that driveway, you're like, where's this movie going now? You know, and it's actually really important to her life today. So I think the movie is very positive as a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, and before Margaret got to that point, I mean, when we interviewed her, she talked about her days in San Francisco, and she referred to, like, you know, she would poke around in the Buddhist temple, and she would talk to palm readers, and she was interested in astrology, and so she was always kind of looking for the answer that worked for her. And then she found it with the Jehovah's Witnesses.
I think that was back to what Amy was mentioning before about her taking ownership in regards to being a little deceitful. So that's the reason why I was asking about whether or not you wanted to put more emphasis on that, or was it just your decision to let it go with the storyline? You know.
Well, I don't think she was. I guess I don't know the timeline exactly, but I don't believe she was a Jehovah's Witness and lying at the same time. I think it all kind of happened at the same time that she told the truth and became a Jehovah's Witness. It was part of why she wanted to tell the truth, and I think it's why she still takes responsibility. I don't think she's interested in putting blame on anybody exclusively. I mean, of course she thinks Walter was crazy, but she takes responsibility for being a part of it.
This movie is based on Margaret's life story, and it's great that you had her involved. But I was wondering if Walter were alive today, this is a question for Amy and Christoph and the filmmakers, would you have wanted to meet with him? And if so, what would you ask him? And Amy, did you get a chance to meet with Margaret's daughter at all?
Yeah, Margaret and Jane are really close still, and she's very much involved in her life. They're always together. So I got to speak with Jane. But I wouldn't want to meet with Walter. Heck no. I wouldn't want him. We'd have to keep it secret that we were making the movie.
You should read his autobiography and then ask yourself that question.
Or try to read it anyway.
He was a great lover, a great man of many things.
Well, in his version, he was Henry Higgins, and she was Eliza Doolittle, and it was a failed experiment. Yeah.
The mood of the film is a very interesting mix. On the one hand, I felt like I was in an Arthur Freed production. There was some American in Paris, especially in the paintings. On the other hand, it seemed like a rewriting of Rumpelstiltskin, where the queen is the one who can spin straw into gold. And he just sells it very well. I'm thinking about other fictional references that might have been there aside from the life story for anyone.
I mean, a big touchstone for us jumping off was The Sweet Smell of Success. If any of you guys remember that movie, it's a terrific movie about press journalists and publicists in New York nightclubs about 1960, and sort of the desperate need to get their names planted in the paper every day. And it all takes place sort of against the backdrop of the Chico Hamilton Quintet. in jazz clubs, and everyone's dressed up really well, and everyone's got a martini in their hand, and everyone's kind of trying to claw over each other to get their name into the paper. And so that was a big influence for us.
But I think also what you're recognizing is that the movie does have a mixture of a lot of things, and I think that's one of the things that Scott and I embrace. I think it's one of those things Tim embraces, and that's why we work very well together, is that 1 minute it's a comedy, and then there's a love story, then it becomes a Hitchcockian thriller, and they can sometimes go through all those things in one scene. And we never understand why you have to necessarily declare a major with a tone, and so that's why I think that it makes our collaboration with Tim very special.
For Tim and Amy, I was wondering, and anybody else, as parents, what kind of life lessons that you think this movie tells, and how it informs, being parents, how it informs choices of movies like this for you?
I don't know if that has anything to do with it for me. I mean, I came at it from a strangely, on one level, because growing up in that era, where these children and understanding the culture that I grew up in, sort of the end of the American dream sort of idea, and the idea of these sort of dysfunctional couple coming together and creating these mutant children, just felt like my family. I mean, it just felt kind of like that sort of. So it had a strange. So I kind of came at a strange way. So, I'll never show this film to my children. I'll show them Sleepy Hollow or Sweeney Todd, but not this one.
It actually played a great deal into my interest in the film. I think I read it before I was a mom, and I saw Margaret one way, and then after I had my daughter and had been a mom for about 4 years, I saw it a total different way. I sort of understood this flawed parent, because I definitely feel like one. Being an artist and being a mom sometimes keeps you at odds. And not to say you can't do it, but an artist's life can feel very isolating and very narcissistic. And being a parent needs to be something completely different. And so I understood that sort of thing and trying to make the right decisions and then getting caught in a lie with your child. That was something that I found really fascinating. And I was really interested by that dynamic. I'm sorry, I'm catching lint, sorry. I'm so comfortable in front of a crowd. Another thing I identified with Margaret was just like, oh gosh, I have to talk in front of people. But yeah, it played a great deal. And Margaret said something great the other day when I asked what she wanted. She was asked what she wanted people to walk away from the movie. She said, "Stand up for yourself, be true to yourself, read your Bible, and don't lie," which is kind of great. But she went on.
Hi, this question is for Tim. Hi. So this film, it's not a typical Tim Burton movie, visually. Your other films were a lot darker, even speaking of light and color. So just tell me a little bit about your choices, visually, to make the movie look like it did.
Well, I mean, it's a combination of things. We sort of went off. For me, it's you have the time, you have the era, you have the paintings. Which suggests something, strange color schemes that the paintings, part of the vibe of it. And then just the story. I mean, the relationship between Margaret and Walter, the other characters, in my own mind, it started to feel like a weird 60s, kind of slightly Hitchcock, or I found myself strangely drawn. I mean, I know, I always loved the films of Mario Bava, but the color schemes in some of his films just fit the era, fit the painting, it fit the sort of psychological kind of relationship and feel of the movie. So, whether it's black and white or color, you try to support that, make it a character in a way. So it just, all of those elements sort of is what made it, what it turned out to be.
And if I may add, I was there every day. I can prove beyond reasonable doubt it is a Tim Burton movie.
I showed up occasionally, yes.
team. As your film vividly shows, there is a struggle, there is a fierce fight between the abstract art and realistic, or how you call it, figurative art. I'm just curious about where are you in this struggle, and do you have a personal stand?
Well, I mean, again, it's a fascinating thing about people's perception of art, and you see it today. I mean, you know, it either speaks to you or it doesn't. I mean, the key, or what, I think the reason the story wasn't so sort of flew under the radar is that most critics, most people didn't really consider it art. So it wasn't really, you know, it was kitsch, you know. So it didn't hit the major headlines. You know, it was sort of probably on the back page of the, you know, Honolulu, you know, whatever. But like I said, I myself have experienced from the very beginning of my career people loving and hating, you know, and also films were saying, oh, this movie it's so much lighter, and then the same movie, oh, people say it's so much darker. So I found that sort of juxtaposition of like, how can something be really light and something then other people see it as completely dark? And so people's perceptions of things fascinate me, you know. I mean, and I think this is a perfect story, an example of that sort of question. It's kind of an unanswerable question. It's just sort of a presentation of that dynamic.
I will also say that you know, Tim was the only director that we actually offered this to, and I think one of the reasons was that he is a visual artist. He is a person used to expressing himself via either films or the canvas or just sketches, and so we felt that he could really put himself in Margaret's position, where a person who you know isn't necessarily great at giving speeches or selling himself, or the sense that, like, you know, the work will speak for himself, and Tim is definitely a believer in that.
I was wondering, it seems like Margaret has kind of an up and down with kind of feminist values. She starts off by leaving her husband and clearly feeling that she deserves more, going on these interviews, and then, of course, with Walter, things dip down, and then by the end, she seems to be embracing being able to be equal. And Deanne also seems to kind of feel that way, have sort of feel that they should be equal, that she knows something's wrong. So do you think either of them really, whether throughout the movie or at the end, identified with feminist values?
I wouldn't know about Margaret. Just, she wasn't a part of, like, movements. Do you know what I mean? She just was sort of, as she puts it, well, I was in a closet making paintings. Like, I like the way that Larry and Scott brought that into the movie, because I do think, whether intentional or not, she did do something that was very much of the moment in standing up for herself. And I do like that sort of coincided with such a great push in the feminist movement. But I'm not sure that Margaret was aware that she was doing it for that purpose, to be a voice for all women. She was really probably doing it to be a voice for Jehovah and for truth.
Larry and Scott, I wanted to know, was there anything in doing your research that you found out about them that you could not put in the film but you might want to share?
We can't tell you.
I mean, there were certainly lots of crazy events that occurred in their lives, but the key to doing a movie biography is you're taking someone's life and turning it into 2 hours, so just you have to leave a lot of things out. The actual, you know, the Life magazine piece that's referred to in the film was actually a crazy section at one point, because they were sort of separating at the time, but Walter had convinced Margaret to come back, and actually they sort of like faked it for Life magazine that they were still living together. And so that kind of stuff was really crazy, but it just didn't have any place in the film.
Hi, I guess this is a question for Scott and Larry, maybe Tim. The film definitely makes a case as Walter being kind of the originator of bringing art to the masses. Do you think his kind of craziness and downfall negated that in the end, or do people still see the Keens as that kind of representation?
I don't know if Walter's been given the credit he's due for cheapening art and spreading it in every direction. but you can totally draw a line from Walter to Warhol to Peter Max to Thomas Kincaid, and it took a certain genius to say, why do we have to sell originals when we can just make cheap posters and staple them into frames and sell them in pharmacies for 25 cents? Yeah. I mean, it hadn't occurred to anybody before. He did it.
And it's funny, going to Art Basel, we always made that connection to, say, Thomas Kincaid, but being there, I could see the connection to Jeff Koons and Schnabel as well, where just like that sort of exit to the gift shop mentality that the modern art world has, that really began with Walter Keane.
Asked the actors what it was like being directed by this Mr. Burton fellow, and if there was anything he said that was particularly helpful in performing your roles.
Shall I leave the room so they can speak freely? Put on headsets, maybe. Oh, I'll leave.
Go ahead.
See? That says it all.
As long as he's sitting here.
Terribly exciting. I'm obviously a big fan, and it was just it was great to visit his world.
Yeah, it was a total dream come true, and he was lovely, and I think he made fun of my feet. No, okay, enough.
It's not that easy, No, in all seriousness, the thing about the Tim Burton movie, this is not so much a Tim Burton movie. It's almost a redundant thought, because it's whatever he does, you invite it to participate, and that invitation sort of puts me personally on my toes, and that's where I want to be.
I agree with everything Christoph said. I'm going to steal it and present it as my own. No, but I agree. It is very inclusive, and you are invited to participate. And I'd been wanting to work with Tim, like, forever, since I could think about being an actress. And so, like Margaret, I'm not a really great self-promotion expert. Like, mostly I just stutter when I meet people I want to work with. So, luckily that worked with Tim. He's like, I totally get it. But I wrote him a letter when I heard about this, and that it was coming back around. I sent him an email expressing my wishes to be involved. And it was awesome. I was one of the most relaxed. I was so relaxed on set, which I don't feel I should have been, but I just felt like I was a part of a big group, something bigger than just what I was playing, and that was a really great feeling.
Yeah, for me, I loved it I loved working on it, but working with Tim, I felt, I don't know if you guys feel, but there's enthusiasm and excitement and fascinated by what we were doing, and an enjoyment, and laughing and smiling, like enjoying what we were doing. Every take, there was joy. I felt that was really fun to do. Like that we were taking great pleasure in it. It felt like so it was wonderful.
I thought he was just laughing at me.
Yeah.
Thank everybody for coming on here. And
speaking of the right person, Oprah Winfrey, I want to talk to you so much about your motivating force behind this film as a producer, but you also decided to give us your creative talent to this film. Why did you choose to play a role in front of the camera as well as behind the scenes?
Because Ava made me do it. Ava made me do it. Ava sent me an online piece regarding the real Annie Lee Cooper that was from a Selma newspaper when she celebrated her 100th birthday in 2010. And in that piece, it talked about her life and her memories of that time in Selma where she actually knocked out Sheriff. She had the fight with Sheriff Clark. And at the end of the piece, it said every day now she watched the Oprah show at 4 o'clock. with a tuna fish sandwich. And she did that on purpose. And Ava said, don't you think it would mean a lot to her to know that you, who she watched every day at 4 o'clock with the tuna fish sandwich, was portraying her? And that was it, because I'd said, no, every film I've been in, I end up hitting somebody. My last movie, I had to slap David. And I said, I want to do another film where I'm knocking somebody out or I'm having a fight and so forth. But it really happened, and it happened that, there's a famous photograph of her being pinned down by the 2 deputy sheriffs. And so I said yes for Annie Lee Cooper and the tuna fish sandwich and watching the Oprah show every day, but more importantly, for every other woman and man in my history who took that walk to the registrar's office and was turned down and then went back home and tried it another year and then went back and tried it another year. This was Annie Lee Cooper's 5th time. And when you think about what it takes to keep getting up and saying, I will and I can, in the face of an entire society that says that you cannot and you will not, I just wanted to be able to take the few minutes in that walk and pay tribute to all of those people. That's why I said yes.
Jeremy, Dee, there are always so many stories behind the scenes that when we learn of them, they were so critical to a film being made, and we've spoken about the power of what this film means today. Can you share with us some of the stories or one key story as to how this film came to be now in this moment when it took so many years to come to life? Jeremy, I'll start with you.
It did have a long history, as you've mentioned, but, my kind of vantage point is really the moment where we met Ava and her kind of incredible vision and the different qualities that made her the perfect filmmaker. That's kind of the moment I remember where we looked at each other, and after a number of false starts, it felt like, wait, this is going to come to pass, this film.
Well, it has nothing to do with me, which are usually the best stories. I think the most extraordinary moment is the one that David tells about sitting on an airplane next to someone who was reading Ava's script for Middle of Nowhere and wondering if he should invest in it. And David reading the script in that moment and then calling Ava and introducing himself and saying, I want to be in your movie. The fact that that happened and we're here, that's the coolest part of the film business, I think. Just the really circuitous and strange way that curiosity and art can have staying power.
We're going to open this to questions in a moment, but I'm going to go to the back row. There's 2 mics that should be roving, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and the mic will come to you. But let me please go to this back row. Miss Carmen, such a beautiful performance as Coretta Scott King. This was not the first time you played Mrs. King. Can you tell us about what you brought to the role and how potentially you learned from your first portrayal into your second?
Sure. Well, I think I was excited to explore the character for a second time, which I can't think of any other actor that's got the chance to do that, to explore the same character at a different part of their life. I think what excited me about doing it again was that it was a very different take, and she's a very different woman at this point. There's a burden, there's a weariness. The marriage is in a very different space. And I think Ava's intention to not explore the iconography of these people and the mythology, and to sort of get behind the curtain and to deconstruct the mythology was what was most intriguing to me. I'm really excited by characters that have an external life that maybe doesn't match up to the internal, and I feel like Coretta is very much that person. I remember watching an episode of Oprah while I was in the UK of a makeover of Coretta, Yeah, and it stuck with me because and I didn't really know who Coretta was at that point. I was just a girl in the UK watching your show, and I remember, though, very vividly being so struck by a woman who still had a hairstyle and a makeup that was sort of stuck in time to some degree, that she was really holding on to a moment in time that she felt in some ways beholden to. And then you did a great job, and you made her look so different. And there was a whole other life that came out in her in that moment. And then the next day she went back to being what we expected
of her. I
of
even sent a hairdresser to Atlanta to try to keep her hair looking like that. And she couldn't accept it.
She couldn't do it. And I think part of that was really interesting to me. A woman that had so much vitality, and she was an academic and an intellectual and an artist and a singer, and that somehow she felt that those things had to be somewhat suppressed for the betterment of the movement, for the sake of the marriage, for the sake of being the mother to her children. That was so heroic to me in so many ways. But the opportunity to explore and to reveal those parts in her in some small way, and I feel like the brilliant scene that Ava wrote in the center of the film, where you get to see her finally being powerful and vulnerable and frustrated, and all of these dynamics. For the first time, for me on film, I think you get to see a far more multi-layered woman than I got to play in 1955 in Boycott, for example. So that's why I wanted to do it.
Ava, how challenging is that for you to have added so many layers to a story which could have been told as A Cradle to a Grave, could have been told as I Have a Dream, and so much built-in drama for the Voting Rights Act, but you devoted so much time on the screen to what we've been talking about, the love story and the personal story. A risk for you as a filmmaker to do that, or?
No, I mean, a risk for me as a filmmaker to make a film that feels like medicine and spinach, and we're on the other side of it now, so it feels good. But facing the idea of making a film about Dr. King, it's like, how do you do that? Like, what do you do to make that feel urgent and vital and immediate and not like a dusty history book? And so, I mean, the ways you do it is you focus on story and character. And in order to focus on story and character, you have to be telling the truth about people. And that's the only way to do that, to make this not be an after-school special type of thing that I don't think anyone here was interested in doing. I don't think, a kind of a standard script approaching this material would have attracted the caliber of the cast or our collaborators, our department heads, all of the creatives that worked on this, such geniuses at what they do. So it wasn't a risk, it was the only thing to be done, I think. Yeah.
Tom Wilkinson, your character has been often portrayed, sir, right, as Mr. President LBJ. Thank you. So you had a lot to draw from in terms of prior performances, but there was a side to your character that was also more personal. Can you describe that?
I hadn't watched any other portrayals of President Johnson. I don't think I... Oh, there have been a few. Yes, I remember them, yes. By English guys, or mostly. Oddly enough. But I didn't really remember them, so I didn't really do an awful lot of research into the guy. Well, I wanted a sense of him. I wasn't going to do an impersonation. I wanted a sense of him. And that's a sort of, just so that intuitively you knew when you were sort of doing the right thing. Have I answered your questions at all?
You have. Yes, you have.
That's it, I think.
For the cast and also the director, there were a lot of really dark moments. Obviously, this is really heavy material to work with, and I can only imagine that as actors and directors and producers, you're taking a lot of it home with you. What were some of the ways that you coped with the dark characters that you were dealing with?
Should we open that up to some of our colleagues? Why don't we go with our darkest character on the panel, Mr. Roth?
Mr. Tim Roth.
Tim Roth.
Well, I got that one. I went to, me and my dad was a full-on lefty and an American man, went to England and fought for the British in the Second World War. And when we were kids, and my mum too was a full-on lefty, so when we were kids, we were taken to demonstrations and we were throwing stones at skinheads and stuff. And we were brought up that way to be active and to be socially active. And King was a presence in our house, as was Wallace. And Wallace was a monstrous human being when we were kids. It was a very flat, two-dimensional kind of animal, and someone to loathe for good reason. But then when she came to me, when Ava came to me to have a go at this, what am I supposed to do? You've got to try and get a three-dimensional walking sort of bag of bones. You've got to get that up and running. So I had to try and find some kind of humanity, something that I could latch onto. And one thing I did, which is kind of similar to what David was talking about, was I looked at footage of him. There's the obvious stuff, that we all know and love. And then, but there was a piece where his son was talking about him, and his son was talking about him in a very different way. And I grabbed onto that. So I could find a little bit of humanity to thread in the limited amount of space that we had to deal with this guy, and kind of threw that at the screen a little bit. But he's horrible, which is fun. But we laughed a lot. Yeah, we really laughed.
We laughed a lot.
I mean, the more racist I was, the more she laughed.
Y'all have created all of you a masterpiece. Oscar buzz all the way. This film, I think, it looks at how important knowing your history is, and I really think a lot of young people today are kind of far removed from that era. They like, for example, Oprah in your masterclass, I remember Cicely Tyson said she asked the 13-year-old about Martin Luther King, and she said, who's Martin Luther King? So I would like to know from you, how important is history, knowing your history to you? Yeah, it's very important.
You already know the answer to the question because you're asking it. I think you don't know yourself and you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've come from. And Maya Angelou has a wonderful poem. It's called To Our Grandmothers. And in that she says, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And I've been in multiple meetings where I was the single woman and the single black person within a 50-mile radius. But I step into that room as one, and I come with 10,000 and 10,000 and 10,000 at my back and my sides. And knowing that means I can go anywhere, I can do anything, because I recognize where I've come from and what I've come from. So the Annie Lee Coopers of the world, whose names a lot of people didn't make the history books and aren't as known as Dr. King and John Lewis and all the others, were equally important in the courage that they demonstrated daily to stand inside and stand up for themselves. And I think that there is no greater, when you understand your history, you understand you.
We have a question here in the back. Sir, to you.
Thank you very much. This very important movie comes at, I think, the most important time. As we saw tens of thousands of marchers yesterday in this city and in cities around the country, it almost seems like it could have been a scene from this film in terms of an outcry for human decency. Oprah, Ava, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think it is a jaw-dropping thing that this piece of art can meet this cultural moment that's so rich, that's so robust, that's so bursting with energy of people amplifying their voices. This film is about voice. This film is about being heard. We're sitting here in this hotel doing interviews about how these marches changed the nation while I hear people marching outside. One of the things about making a film like this, a film about history, as a filmmaker that you fear is how do you make it immediate, how do you make it textural, relevant, something that people can see themselves in. But we are experiencing these very things right now. And the thought of that the timing, although this film took a long time to get made, although, once we were able to make it, we had to make it really quickly, 32 days to shoot and run, that the timing...
And a day and a half to shoot Bloody Sunday. A day and a half.
Yes. That the timing was all perfect. Like you always tell me, it was exactly what it should be. And I feel like this film, not to overstate it, but it is here for a reason in this moment. And we just hope, I think, that it can add to the conversation, to the energy that's going on. What a vibrant time, I mean, in our adult lives to be able to see this kind of, nation galvanize around these issues. I think it's very exciting.
Carmen, speak to us, please, about relevance. You are a hip-hop artist by trade, an artist of many different kinds, and you were on a march just yesterday and the day before. But talk to us about what you brought to the role and what it means to you to be in such a film.
Well, it's a beautiful honor to be a part of Selma because as a kid, I think the first person that I read about and came across that black people and white people both recognized as a hero was Dr. Martin Luther King. And he was always somebody I really looked up to. And it became a point in my life where, I became real Malcolm X's. And it was like, I don't know, Martin may be soft. But, as I grew and evolved as a human being, I realized that this peaceful protest is one of the strongest things you can do, and the strength that it took to do that. Me being involved in Selma, taught me that it was women, it was men, it was children. It was a spirit that said we want freedom, we want justice, and a lot of people contributed to that. Because originally I was like, man, it's Martin Luther King. It's Martin Luther King. But to get to meet the everyday people, some people we don't know their names. Yeah, we do know of the Annie Lee Coopers, and we do know of the C.T. Vivians, but it's some people I had a journalist yesterday talk to us about her uncle who was out marching, and we don't know his name, but everybody contributed. And what this film did was make me realize that we all have a part in contributing towards making the world better. So it's like this was like a life-changing experience for me because I felt I could do more, just being able to be James Bevel and be around Ava and be around the cast and the people that we worked with. I was like, I have to do more. I mean, learning about what they did, I got to do more. And now people out there doing more, and we want to do more. So I'm just grateful to be a part of it, and the revolution is here.
Thank you. We have a question here, purple sweater.
Purple sweater here. Wonderful film. Quick question. A lot of people are going to draw parallels, of course, to what happened then and what's happening now. Talk to me a little bit about that three-step strategy that the SCLC had that Dr. King's character said. It was 3 steps. I can't recall exactly. Do you think that strategy should still play to what we're experiencing today? And I'm sorry that I can't recall the 3 steps. I know you know, though, David.
You're right, I do. Well, I think that the parallels that I can see in terms of Selma and Ferguson is in the same way that in Ferguson, when it was voting rights that was being asked for, it was a black problem. Once Bloody Sunday happened and the country saw those images, it became an American problem. I think with Ferguson, when it was about Ferguson, it was a black problem. When the country saw the injustice of what happened to Eric Garner, it became an American problem. And that was the point beyond which black and white came together and these marches really gained momentum. And in that instance, in Selma, the problem was voting rights, and there was federal intervention because what you had is a situation whereby, for want of a better phrase, the game was rigged. As a black person, if you got killed and someone was brought on trial, they most likely would get off because it was a white jury of their peers. We have a situation now where what we need is police reform, and the game is rigged again because there is a conflict of interest if it's local prosecutors and the police. So I would say we need federal intervention again, but also we just need to focus in what are the demands. My fear at the moment is we have this amazing slew of protests, but we don't have someone like Dr. King articulating what it is we want, what it is we need.
A clear intention.
A clear intention. And that's not to say that we need a Dr. King in order to do that, but what I hope Selma shows and what is clearly needed is that clear intention. What are we asking for? How are we going to ask for it in a tactical, politically savvy way? And I really hope and pray that our film in some ways shows what was effective in the past and how we can be effective going forward.
Andre Holland, I want to bring you into this conversation. You play Andrew Young, sir. There was a camaraderie and just a spirit of kind of friendship and kinship between Andrew and Dr. King and kind of his boys, if you will, right? Just the kind of crew that was putting this all together and going through the South. Talk about that feeling kind of on set or just how you were able to capture that and bring that to the screen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I think, jumping on what David just said, one of the things I found most sort of remarkable about this experience was learning that there were so many people who were leaders in their own right. Andrew Young, John Lewis, Bevel, so many of them who have been incredible leaders, And I think that same sort of feeling of camaraderie did extend to our set. And there were these moments of magic that I think happened during the filming of this process, one of which for me, having been born and raised in Birmingham and growing up very near 16th Street Church. My family actually ran a funeral home that's right across the street from 16th Street Church. And my uncle used to always tell me stories about that time, Kelly Ingram Park. And one of the stories he told me was about, one of many, was about a white man named Lamar Weaver who had been protesting and helping with the movement. And one night was chased through the streets all around Kelly Ingram Park and ended up at the doorstep of the Poole Funeral Chapel. And in order to keep him from being killed, my Uncle Ernest brought him in the funeral home and hid him in a casket in the back so that they couldn't find him. And those kind of stories to me were magical, and the fact that we got to bring these people to life, not just the ones who everyone knows, but the ones who people know less about, but also played such an instrumental part, to me was probably the most special part of the entire experience.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Rakia. I'm here with Black Enterprise. My question is for Ms. Winfrey. We all have moments in life where, we meet someone and we sort of know that that person is special. It's like this moment where you might go tell your friends or it sort of connects for you and you know that this person is a game changer. They're going to do something amazing. What was that moment for you? You can call it an aha moment with Ava where you knew that this was a history maker, a visionary. She was it.
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks for giving me that question. Actually, I had that moment first with David Oyelowo. David and I were in the trailer doing Butler, and David handed me the tape of, he said, I did this little film.
She always makes me sound like Oliver Twist.
Anyway, I looked at the tape. I Googled Ava. I saw that she was an African-American woman director and read a little bit of her history. And I emailed her, got her email address from David. Did I call you up? I didn't call you.
You called me up.
I did? I didn't call. I emailed you first and said we're going to be friends, and then I called her up and told her we're going to be.
Emailed me and said we're going to be friends.
Yeah, and I emailed and said we're going to be friends. Please send me your phone number so I can call you.
Like in the subject line, we're going to be friends.
We're going to be friends, and send me your phone number. And I could feel from her countenance, from her the spirit of her, that there was something inside her that I also had inside me. I could see that in David, and that's why I befriended David on The Butler. And I could feel the same thing in Ava. And I think that part of my trajectory here on the planet has been to try to inspire and lift other people up. So when I saw that here was somebody who has that thing, that it thing, I wanted to do everything in my power to lift that up, to bring light to that, to bring attention to that. And so that's why it happened. And now we're just buds. We're just real buds. Yeah, really.
We'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the beauty of this film and the cinematography and the art direction and some of those choices.
Bradford
Please,
Young. Yeah.
Round of applause for Mr. Bradford Young, our cinematographer. And Ava, you can speak to this, and Carmen even as well. I mean, two scenes that stick out for me is the opening scene when you know, Carmen, you and David are just, you're getting him ready to go to the Nobel Peace Prize and fixing his tie and having
Love it.
just an intimate conversation. I mean, a beautiful way to open the film, and it looks so real and emotional before we even had met the characters. Carmen?
And Dr. King has some swag in that. Doesn't
He does.
Doesn't he have a little zhuzh in there? You think, oh,
And
Dr.
so your
King got
question
some
is-
zhuzh.
And so your question is?
Just the idea of how were you able to help, articulate that kind of beauty and the being able to have lines that were about being a wife and being in love, because it was not easy for Coretta Scott King in this relationship with such an individual as Martin was and the mission that he was on.
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, how to retain the elegance and the regalness that we have come to associate with Coretta, despite the cracks, the the sexy. Yeah, I mean, I think David and I had always intended to make these people as authentic as a couple as possible, and that includes sensuality, that includes touching, that includes being intimate. And even if we haven't seen it before, I don't think in any way we felt we were doing a disservice to the legacy or to the heroism of these people by showing that they had human desires and human elements to them. In fact, I felt very strongly that we were doing them an absolute service by showing that they had the same desires and wants and frailties and foibles and doubts as the rest of us, because to then be able to achieve the things that they did, despite the fact that they are as human as the rest of us, makes them even more aspirational to me. It was an absolute privilege to flesh them out and to make them desirous of flesh and all of those things that a married couple are.
Thank you. We had a question here. Ma'am in the front, yes.
Selma's emotionally riveting, and it grabs you, and the times today, our contemporary times, are emotionally riveting also. And if Ferguson and if Eric Gardner hadn't happened and this film was still released today, what would the parallels that you're drawing that people are drawing to those situations and Selma what would they be if those two things hadn't happened, and what would you want the message to be of the film today?
Well, I mean, distressed race relations in this country is ambient. It's not just happening because of these two things. So when we were making the film, I mean, it's part of the atmosphere of this country. I certainly feel that as a person of color. So these incidences are amplifying that in a very specific way, where it's feeling like it's very much at the forefront of what everyone's thinking about. But as a person of color in this country, I think about that all the time when my brothers walk out of the house, and I hope that they come back. And that's just always there. So yes, this is a beautiful time where we're able to kind of, there's a magnifying glass on it, but it certainly, I don't think, would have been entirely different if these events hadn't happened. What was top of mind for me while making the film was the Voting Rights Act. That was all we were thinking about and talking about early on. I really thought that would be a big topic of conversation as we presented the film. The dismantling of the very act that we are chronicling its creation in the film, the violence to that act that has happened and is hard to put back together. So there's so much going on within the film that it's not all specific to Ferguson, I don't think. And hopefully, I mean, that's what art does. It continues to illuminate things as the years go on. What we will see in this film, Selma, hopefully if people are watching it 10 years from now, is something that we probably haven't even thought of yet. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
We'll go here on the side. Chuck.
Hi, everybody. Great film. I really loved it. I'm Chuck Creekmer from allhiphop.com. So I have a quick two-piece question for Ava and Oprah. For Ava, or rather for Oprah, I should say, how do we continue to get these types of engaging programs, not only in film, but also in TV, like the 90s or maybe the 80s, if that makes any sense to you? And my question for Ava is, have you gotten any response from the King family?
Yes.
And what is that response?
Do you want to switch questions?
Yeah.
Under the 80s and the 90s?
Okay, you do that.
You mean you mean 80s and the 90s when there was an abundance of films about centered on Black life, or not an abundance but more? That's right. That's right. That's right. Yes, yes, I understand. Yes, I mean, I think you know. Well, Black artists and Black cinematic artists have been making those films. It really is that there's a certain gaze on them now. I think, that there's some of them that have kind of, I won't even say risen. There's some that have had a spotlight placed on them. But I mean, as a Black independent filmmaker, there's been a continuum of beautiful things made. There's been no drop off from the 80s to this time. The drop off has been who's watching them and paying them attention, right? And so I think now you have a resurgence of attention around some beautiful things, whether it be Fruitvale Station, 12 years, and The Butler last year, or this year with Belle, with Beyond the Lights, with Dear White People. I mean, it's there. There are more coming next year, but they've always been. And so I think the charge is to make sure that they remain in a place of consistency. And we talk a lot about Black, but what about Brown? What about Indigenous? What about Asian? I mean, it's just, there's not enough diversity behind the camera. It's really about giving the storytellers of all kinds the ability to let their voice be heard. It's my hope.
Yes, we have heard from the Kings. Last weekend in Santa Barbara, at my home, we had a celebration with all of the civil rights leaders who were actually a part of the film. John Lewis and Andrew Young and Julian Bond and Reverend Lowry and Diane Nash, and all of them were there. And along with Bernice King and Martin Luther King Jr. III. They've seen the film now at least 2 times. They're really impressed with Carmen. They think that Carmen really depicted their mother beautifully and felt equally so about David's portrayal of Dr. King. So they're pretty pleased with the film. Yeah.
I think we have time for...
Hello, I'm Danielle from HelloBeautiful.com. Ava named us.
Yes, I did.
This question is for, as well, you and Oprah, kind of a double-parter as well.
Like your T-shirt.
Thank you. Peace, love, and Oprah.
Oprah T-shirt. Very good,
Couldn't help but notice.
I was hoping you would, girl. That's why I did it. So,
I did.
So, Ava. Obviously, you guys have spoke to this a lot. You make a lot of films that share a human experience. And it was really powerful to see that with Dr. King, seeing that he also needed people to pour into him for him to be the leader of this movement, which was very beautiful. How do you do that? How do you dig into a human experience of someone from our past that's mystified?
Right. I mean, you just have to really deconstruct all of the things that you think that you know about him and really look to the fact that this is a brother from Atlanta. Father was a preacher. Grandfather was a preacher. He didn't want to be a preacher. Went to Boston, fell in love with this fine sister, right? Beautiful sister. She was a little older than him. Most people don't know that. They fell in love. He moves to Atlanta because from Atlanta to Montgomery, wants to get away from his father, wants to have a little room to breathe and be his own man. 2 seconds of him arriving there, he gets swept up by the local leaders. He's handsome. He can talk pretty well. Have him start talking about this bus boycott thing. Have him start to talk about what's going on with Mrs. Parks, and he gets swept up in history. That's the way we approach it, as a person in their real life story, as opposed to 4 words and being your whole life is reduced to 4 words, to I have a dream. I mean, what will any of us do if we were reduced to 4 words? He was so much more than that. And so that was my approach, is just to try to track his life and get underneath the meat of it.
Well, and listen, Ava is brilliant, because I think you all probably recognize, we didn't have the IP for this, and so we were not allowed to use any of his original speeches. And there were times where, we needed another scene, and literally the producers would be on the phone and said, Ava, can you write that this weekend? Can you go back and channel Dr. King and write that this weekend? Which she did. So every single word coming out of his mouth for those speeches, Ava wrote them. And did it in such a way that in the end, Bernice King says to you,
that it's the best interpretation of my father I've ever seen.
There you go.
David, I'll stay with you, and this may have to be the last word, but Sidney Poitier said he chooses to do his work as a reflection of his values. Is this a project that you've chosen, sir, as a reflection of who you are?
Yeah, never before have I engaged in an artistic endeavor that so brings everything I am as a man together. I'm a Christian myself. I have 4 children. Because of my faith, sacrificial love, love in the face of injustice, these are the things I hold dear. So, you know, as a man, as a storyteller, as a citizen of the world, you know, what you see when you watch Selma is everything I value and aspire to be. One of the things I was so glad that we showed, 2 of the things, was how humanity came together to fight this cause together. Black, white, people of several faiths coming together. I think that that's the most beautiful thing we do as human beings, is coming together. I also feel as a man, one of the things I was so proud of with this film was Ava bringing to light the women in this film. I have a beautiful wife. I have an incredible daughter. I am a big fan of women. You know, they were marginalized within this movement, even though it was a movement against injustice and inequality. They were just as brilliant, they were just as bright, they were just as courageous and tenacious. You know, I just feel one of the greatest blessings of my life was also seeing Ava and Oprah behind the monitor while we were shooting this thing. That, to me, is definitely a realization of Dr. King's dream. A beautiful black woman telling this story so beautifully, this other beautiful black woman helping us get this story told. This wouldn't have happened 50 years ago in terms of them helping us get this done. And so, if this is one of, if not the greatest things I do with my life, I will be happy with that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Selma opens in limited release on Christmas Day in New York and Los Angeles. It then goes wider on January the 9th. Our
New York,
hashtag
Los
is
Angeles,
we added new
DC,
cities, folks.
and
You guys are
Atlanta.
getting new news.
New
we
York,
haven't said
Los
it
Angeles,
before.
Atlanta and DC as well.
It's added on Christmas.
New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. on Christmas Day, wider January 9th. The hashtag is March On. I'd like to please thank Andre Holland, Tim Roth, Carmen Ejogo, Common, Tom Wilkinson, our producers Dee Dee Gardner, Jeremy Kleiner, Oprah Winfrey, David Oyelowo, and of course, Miss Ava DuVernay. Thank you, everyone.